Hi, so I'm going to talk today. I'm LARA JORDAN. I'm going to talk today about wattle crane movement and habitat use and understanding the importance of space. For those that don't know wattled cranes, they're critically endangered in South Africa. There's been a range of threats to them, which has led to poor productivity, adult mortality. By and large, there's two different lifestyles within the population, that of breeding and nesting, and that of float-to-flock, which is the non-breeding birds that often move together in smallish groups. So you can see from the map here, the Zambia, Zimbabwe area, that's where the central wattle crane population is, and it's much larger. But down in the South Africa, around Lesotho, you can see the population is very small in this area of wattle cranes. So threats include habitat loss through conversion of grasslands to agriculture, through afforestation and damming, and degradation through wetland draining and due to under or overgrazing of grasslands. So we know that the wattle cranes from ringing data don't move that very far, and so mostly they stay around the areas. We know that they move from the Midlands through to the Eastern Cape and very little to other areas. Where there were stronger populations in Mpumalanga, those populations have declined dramatically, although there is some rumour of some populations in the Free State. So our aim was to understand and compare movement of wild and captive reared released birds, and this had come out as part of the recovery program. Was it possible? Did we have the needs and understanding to release cranes into the wild if a catastrophic event happened that we needed to? So there was a small study done on this. We also wanted to understand regional movement of the float-to-flock, who have quite a different lifestyle. And we wanted to know how different adult and juvenile behaviour was, where key roost sites are, and key foraging areas. So although we've done many aerial surveys, and the aerial surveys have been going on just short of 30 years, we needed to get more in-depth knowledge, especially in the constantly changing landscape that we live in. So we designed and tested different transmitters and eventually settled on a GSM microwave telemetry transmitter. And then we designed a backpack transmitter by Ben Hoffman to put on adult wattle cranes. The ring transmitter was used for chicks. So for this presentation, I'll just be sharing some of the information from 8 of the trackers of the 11 that were put on. So this is the data we have so far. There's 5 wild crane chicks, and that's 834 to 838, and then 2 released from the KwaZulu-Natal Crane Foundation released chicks, and that's 840 and 841, and then there was 1 adult that was tracked, and that's at the top referred to as adult. You can see here that one of the chicks, it was 838. Once had grown up and was flying, flew all the way to Free State, and we haven't been able to find it again since. We don't know if the bird died, but the tracker stopped working, and we were out there, but it was an interesting flight path because all the other birds pretty much did the regional migration, which is towards Cedarville and back to the Midlands again. So there was some surprising, and clearly it does prove there is some movement to Free State. So just to explain that difference between the float-to-flock, so this dark green heat map is 238,000 points from the wild wattle cranes and the one release bird. And you can see that there's a very different movement and occupancy. The little orange dots here are actually the nest sites of wattle cranes that we know. And so you can see there is quite 2 distinct lifestyles, which is important to understand, because with a float-to-flock, it can really alter the effects of what's happening in a population. We also found, using the ringing data, that the floater and the family unit had quite different land use needs. Obviously, we know from various studies that the family units and the breeding sites are in wetlands. And you can see there's quite a high proportion of the floater flock that lives on stubble fields. And that was by and large where those birds were seen. Obviously, there can be a bias within that ringing reciting data. And then the next main area was grasslands, as you can see from this little bar chart. So we can clearly see there is a distinction. So Isabella and Fulo, these are the two birds that were released from the KZN Crane Foundation. They were isolated reared following protocols from the International Crane Foundation. And you can see these are the movements. So 834 was a wild bird, so I just used this bird because it's our longest standing tracking information. And you can see that's in blue, and you can see that this bird has spent some time in Cedarville, but most of its time around the Midlands. The orange is 841, which is Umfula. And you can see this bird didn't do quite what we'd hoped it would do. It didn't do the regional movement, which was unfortunate. And then you can see here 840, which is in the green, and the second orange dot to the right, the green is under there. And this bird has definitely behaved like we would anticipate, which would to be doing the regional floater flock. So we discovered with Umfula a little surprising behavior of interest is that Umfula decided to hang out with vultures. We don't have any great explanation, nothing dramatic happened to this bird during rearing process. However, I do feel perhaps its lack of boldness. Boldness is a key factor or character that is needed for release birds, and perhaps this bird didn't quite have what it was required to do that. So we analysed using marginal convex polygons, MCP, and you can see here 50% and 95% of the by week from week 0 of 834. It's clear here, even though these birds can't fly as yet, that there's quite a lot of movement outside of the 50% boundary. So we're just looking at other ways to analyze this data. We'll be looking at using potentially kernel density or local convex hull, which helps with the sort of movement the wattle cranes show, which is a lot of intense movements in small areas and then a large movement to the next area. And this can sort of be seen in these diagrams. These three are each 840, 841 and 834, so 2 of the hand-reared birds and one of the wild released birds. And so you can see there's quite a similar movement pattern across the board there. So the other important area that we were looking at is roost sites, and I just give you here an example of a nesting area for chick 834. And you can see that even in a breeding site territory, there are a number of different roost sites. And this isn't something that has been deeply considered in the past, but it may be relevant to survival of the chicks. You can see here on this map that we're looking at 834. The yellow in the middle is the breeding site for this species, for this individual, and then you can see the roosting sites that's recorded. And to get this information, I literally just took all the times between 11 o'clock and 1 in the morning to get the different roost sites that these birds use. And this is going to be vital because what we want to do is ground truthing to start to understand what a roost site looks like for a wattle crane that lives in the floater flock. Because if we can understand this, we can better monitor and understand where the birds are going. Here you can see the overlap between 836, the roosting site for one crane chick, also a wild bird, and also you can see the roost sites for 835, and that's the orange. So there is quite a lot of overlap either with the roost sites, even when so adults move into the chick areas, and vice versa. Of course, this might happen at different times of the year, and as we go into deeper understanding of this data set, we will hopefully unfold some of these seasonal changes. However, it does explain to us quite a lot about the interaction between the breeding sites and the floater flock. You can see here in pink, these are known nest sites, and then you can see all the roosting sites, and some of those areas overlap with the chick nest sites. And this can lead to an interaction whereby fighting occurs, and we are seeing an increase in fighting between chicks, but between adults. But we need to understand at a better level as to why this is occurring. And some of understanding the roost sites may be an explanation. There may be pressure on certain wetlands in some areas. And the reason this is important is because this interaction will definitely reduce success on a nest and survival of a nest. And this is vital for understanding ongoing survival, and whether, as the population increases, whether survival on the nest will become more difficult in certain areas. You can see here, this is just an overview. This is just 3 chicks, wild chicks. I'm still working through the other data, but you can see the complexity of the picture we're forming, and that's just 5 with just 3 birds here, but we can see that it's going to be quite an interesting, and it would be great to model some of this behavior and interaction and overlap with some on-the-ground truthing of territorial interactions and behavior. This is one of the nest sites where we've just recently had a territory taken over by a younger pair, and in fact one of these birds, both of these birds were actually being tracked, and both the adults that had previously been on that were killed in the process. So it's interesting to understand more about this. The other thing we're doing with this tracking data is we're starting to look at the land cover use. Previously we've only looked at the ringing data and land cover use, but we can see here in much greater detail different landscape uses. So 837 was a chick that never fledged, and we can see that there's quite a lot of grassland use within this nesting site, and also a lot of the wetland. It gets more complicated as the chicks grow older, so over months. You can see there's definitely a pattern forming where crop for a floater flock is utilized quite heavily. And understanding this is important as land reform takes place. We need to understand how these species interact in that land use. This is just looking at it from a monthly and seasonal perspective to try and determine, and we hope to do some spatial analysis, seasonal spatial analysis that will more accurately define, but we can definitely see that we are starting to see a picture building. So in summary, it's vital for us to understand the landscape through the entire lifetime of a wattled crane. And so identifying core home ranges after they leave the safety of the wetland nest sites and grassland areas is significant for determining long-term survival. Once the chicks have fledged, the role of agriculture and foraging changes, and understanding this relationship is important for understanding threats. Foraging and roosting areas provide a blueprint to identifying some of the key threats, such as power lines or any changes within wetland systems. And so this is what we'll further analyse for conservation efforts. I'd like to thank all our partners and funders.